If you've seen previous videos, or if you know me, you'd know that I'm a massive Tori Amos fan. She's my favorite artist and musician and songwriter. I wanted to go through her catalog and kind of give my personal ranking of her studio albums and talk about one of my favorites of hers that I think is overlooked even though it's not too old, Native Invader, which I'll be going through more as we get to that album in the ranking. Some things that I'm not going to include in the ranking is the Christmas album, Midwinter Graces, the Tales of a Librarian Greatest Hits collection, even though there are new tracks and new mixes of songs that had been previously released. I'm not going to include Gold Dust, even though it technically is one of her non-holiday studio albums. So since it's album number 12, I won't be listing a 12th studio album in the ranking. I'm just going to skip that number, but I'm not going to include it. If I were to include this, it would be last, basically. Won't include any of the EPs, as awesome as they all are. I'm not going to include any bootlegs. And I won't include any live albums, even though sometimes it is the best representation of Tori as a musician. I'm also not going to include Why Can't Tori Read, but if I were going to, I would rank it just below To Venus and Back. So Why Can't Tori Read was the first album that Tori released under the name Why Can't Tori Read, and it came out in '88. But she didn't officially start coming into her own until she released the album Little Earthquakes under the name Tori Amos. Now, since I love Tori, none of these albums, even the first one that I'm going to name, which is my bottom choice, my least favorite, I don't not like any of these. I like them all, and then when we get closer into the list, I love most of these albums. So even though it is my least favorite, it's still an album that I appreciate and will buy on vinyl when it eventually is released that way. But my first pick, my least favorite album, The Beekeeper, which came out in 2005. This was Tori's 8th studio album, and my biggest gripe is that it's a little too safe. The production is a little too middle of the road and light, just really heavy on the easy listening, which I don't really have a problem with overall, but it just permeates this album so much that it just really becomes boring, and it has my least favorite song on it by Tori, Hoochie Woman. Overall, the album is 19 tracks, and I think you can cut a good 6 or 7, and this would have been a lot better of an album. Now, this next pick might be a little controversial, but my next least favorite is Night of Hunters. Now, it's not that it's not a good album, but it's a different kind of music than most of us Tori fans might be into. However, some folks claim it's the best thing that she's done since Under the Pink, or even Little Earthquakes. It's basically a classical record with her own new vocals paired with classic arrangements. And maybe one day this album will grow on me. I still listen to it every now and again because I can appreciate the beauty of the arrangements, but it's definitely not one of my favorites yet. Next up, we have Strange Little Girls. This is an album of covers that Tori came out with in 2001. It was her 6th album and her last with Atlantic Records. And the lore is that she recorded a covers album because she didn't want to give Atlantic any more of her own songs. So this was the arrangement that they came up with. Her contract didn't specifically state that the songs had to be written by her. They just had to be an album that fans would still be able to understand as a Tori Amos album and not too left field. Like she probably wouldn't have been able to get away with doing a children's album to get out of her contract. But overall, the arrangements are pretty good. It is different than what she had previously done. And the style of the arrangements would be more of an electronic focused style that she, I think, might have perfected more in her later career. Next we have Unrepentant Geraldines, which is an album that I really like. I think that the songwriting is really great and the arrangements are really good. I don't think it's as good as most of the stuff that has come before it, but I definitely think that it ended up being more of a return to form after Gold Dust and Night of Hunters. It's her 13th album, and it came out in 2014. And a lot of people were confused by the arrangements, but the thing that I really love about this album is that it's very much a family affair with Tori and her husband and her daughter. And it has one of my favorite songs on it, Promise, which is mine and my husband's wedding song, and it's also the notes on our ring. Next up is Abnormally Attracted to Sin, which is a really interesting album. It's the last one that would feature full band arrangements for almost 10 years. Actually, for more than 10 years, not including Midwinter Graces. It's another album that is overly long. I think that if they cut 5 songs from this, it would be a lot better of an album, but the arrangements are really interesting and for the most part, really fun. The song That Guy is just this beautiful, gorgeous orchestral ballad. A lot of people don't like songs like Police Me and Fire to Your Plane, but I love the arrangements on these two songs. Police Me is really left field, it's very beat-oriented, and it's just a strange little song. And then Fire to Your Plane is it reminds me of something that Fleetwood Mac would do in the 80s. Next up, we have the album that came right before Abnormally Attracted to Sin. It is American Doll Posse. This was Tori's 9th album. It came out in 2007, and it was another album with 23 tracks that definitely could have been cut in half or lost a good third of the tracks and would have been a lot better. But there was a little issue with editing that Tori had in this period of her career, and so she pretty much put on just about everything. And sometimes it's a really fun listen all the way through, and sometimes you kind of wish that Programmable Soda wasn't on there along with Posse Bonus, and a lot of people like Dragon, but I prefer Smokey Joe out of those two songs. I also think Velvet Revolution, it's a good song, but it probably could have been a better B-side. But overall, it's a more rock-oriented album than the previous one that came out before this, which was The Beekeeper. So I was very happy with the more up-tempo, guitar-based arrangements. And Big Wheel's a great song as well. So we've talked about 6 albums so far. And a lot of those are Tori's later period albums, but I want to talk about some later period albums that I think are among her best, including Ocean to Ocean, Tori's most recent album. This album came out in 2021, and it was the first to have a full band arrangement since 2009's Abnormally Attracted to Sin and then Midwinter Graces. Some of the arrangements, although they're really pleasant to the ears, are a little middle of the road, like Devil's Bane and Ocean to Ocean, but the songwriting is top notch. Spies is one of the most interesting things that Tori has put down to tape in a long time, because of its surprising electronic flourishes. Metal Water Wood is also a really interesting and unique song with a very interesting arrangement. It is unlike most things that she's done in the past, although kind of similar to songs like Fire to Your Plane. Flowers Burn to Gold is beautiful. It's basically Tori singing about her mother, who had recently died, and how she's looking for her and can't find her. And it's incredibly soul-crushing, and I love it. A lot of people really aren't big on the way that she's singing, where it sounds to her like she's singing we. I can get past it, and I think it's beautiful, but I know a lot of people aren't really big on it. The song closing, Birthday Baby, is just really awesome, and I love the way it goes, and the tango-ish vibe that it has. I think it's really a great way to close out the album. Next up, we have Native Invader, which came out right before Ocean to Ocean in 2017.
Under-fucking-rated.
It was Tori's 14th studio album, not including Midwinter Graces or Why Can't Tori Read. It opens and closes with 2 songs that were written about her mother, who at the time had a stroke and was not able to communicate. The first song, Reindeer King, is just incredibly sad. It's, for lack of a better word, it's a little bit hopeless feeling. But then the closer, Mary's Eyes, also incredibly sad, but in a little bit more of a whimsical way. It doesn't feel so hopeless, even though one of the refrains is Sister Despair, because there is despair in the song, and just the whole I'm a believer, and it's I'm gonna start to cry. It's just an actual absolutely gorgeous opener and closer. But the meat of the album is between all that, starting with Wings, which displays that Tori's extremely beautiful soprano is as in place as it always was, and maybe sounds even better than it has in years. We've got Broken Arrow and Cloud Riders, which have a kind of a bluesy classic rock vibe to them, and I always thought that Broken Arrow sounded like a song that Lisa Simpson would sing, where she was trying to get people to care about their future. But it is definitely a great song, and Cloud Riders doesn't have its own video, but it brings in great visuals with its lyrics.
I didn't use a rattler because if Jesus was busy, I was up the creek.
Up the Creek is, like Spies from Ocean to Ocean, a very, very interesting arrangement, and it includes prominent vocals from her daughter, Natasha, whose voice is incredible. I really hope that at some point that she puts out some music of her own. Even if she didn't write it, I think that she's got a really incredible voice. Breakaway follows all of that, and it brings the album back to just Tori, her vocals, and a piano. And it's one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking songs that she's ever written. My guess is that she's writing it to Samuel Adamson, who she worked with on The Light Princess. I'm just completely pulling this out of my... because I don't know. It sounds like something that was written around The Light Princess and how they were disappointed that it didn't go further. They thought it should have gone further than it did go, and Tori sings, "You feel betrayed and I feel played," which is just this amazing way to say, I know that I hurt you, but it's because I was led astray. I listened to the wrong people. It's effective. It's definitely one of the main reasons why Native Invader is so high on the list, and why I really wish that she would have done more of these songs live in her last couple of tours, and I'm hoping in future tours she will start incorporating them live more. We've got Climb and Chocolate Song, which are both very misleading in their arrangements. Chocolate Song is very sensual, and I guess you don't really think it's going to be until you really delve into what she's saying and how she's singing. It's just, you can understand wanting to hold on to that spark that you are afraid is going to fade, where relationships change and evolve, and sometimes it's kind of scary to see how they change without thinking this change means it's over, when in fact it means it's just moving to a new, sometimes better, sometimes interesting, sometimes different place. Climb is this gorgeous song that is kind of folky, and it's just really talking about the simplicity of walking around a church ground, but then it goes deeper into what the consequences are for being on that church ground and what you have to give up of yourself to be there. Absolutely beautiful chorus, one of her best. So the next three songs are Bang, Bats, and Benjamin. Bang is the best song on this album. I think it's one of my favorites in the last 20 years that she's written. Although it's not in the top 10 that I'm gonna give in just a little bit. It's still just this great song that I would consider it a fan favorite. She did it once in her Native Invader tour, and hopefully she'll be inclined to do it more because it's really just an awesome, beautiful song. Bats and Benjamin are kind of crossing the mystical into the real for me. It sounds like she's taking on real life situations like being lost and found or working with technology and turning them into these fairy tales and making them a little bit more mystical, like Tori is wont to do. And the arrangements are really something like Unrepentant Geraldine's. This album was a family affair with just Tori and her husband, along with some beautiful orchestration by John Philip Chanel. At first, when I saw the cover of this album, I, for some reason, didn't think I was gonna like it because I thought it was gonna be really dark, and for some reason I thought it was gonna be a slog, but it's definitely been one that I go back to quite a bit since it came out 5 years ago. So going back to the list, my next favorite is To Venus and Back, which is Tori's fifth album that came out in 1999, and it has one disc of all new songs, which are just these wonderful electronic arrangements with a full band. Sometimes her vocals get a little lost in it, but if you listen to it as much as I have, then it really becomes less and less of a problem. I really think that the singles from this album really should have been bigger than they were because they're among Tori's best, even though Bliss, I think, is just an okay track. It had a great video, though. The live tracks on To Venus and Back cover the tour from the previous year, for the Choir Girl album from the Choir Girl Hotel, which I'll mention soon. It was the first time she'd ever toured with a live band, and capturing that sound and putting it out in this context was a phenomenal idea. It makes for a wonderful live album to go along with a studio album. So now we're getting into the top 5, and this might be a little bit of a controversial pick for some as well, but number 5 to me is going to be Tori's debut, Little Earthquakes. It's a great primitive album with really strong songwriting, wonderful vocals, and amazing arrangements from David Sigerson. I don't know how to pronounce that, who also produced one of my favorite Olivia Newton-John albums, The Rumor. I think that she would really improve upon the sound of this record for the remainder of the 90s, but this is an amazing start. Next up, we have Scarlet's Walk, which is probably her most acoustic-based album, and it's also probably got the best songwriting of her career. It was, in a way, kind of a comeback for her because of the success of Assorted Fairy Tale, whose video included Adrian Brody right around the time that he was doing The Pianist. And from beginning to end, it's an 18-track album, and it doesn't feel bloated like some of the ones that would come after it that would also be 18, 19, 23 tracks. It's a really fresh take on Tori's arrangements. It's a really fresh take on her songwriting and how she incorporates that with other musicians. It's also the first time that we see a credit for guitar to Mac Aladdin, which is Tori's husband Mark Hawley's musician alias. So next up, and number 3, and also her third album, which came out in '96, Boys for Pele. I was 16 when Boys for Pele came out. It was the first Tori album that came out as I was a fan, so I was really anticipating it. Didn't know what to expect, and I definitely did not expect this. It's stark, it's raw, it's hard to listen to at times, but it's so rewarding and it's so wonderful, and it's one that I didn't understand the first few listens, but it kept making me want to come back to it, and I eventually grew to love it. And at times it was my favorite album from Tori. Over the years that's kind of changed, and it's been usurped by 2 others, including From the Choir Girl Hotel, which is my second favorite. This was the first time that she worked with a full band, recording and producing with a full band. Not including Why Can't Tori Read. She created this amazing chemistry that I don't think any album has been able to replicate by anybody. The way that the textures align and the acoustic piano fits in with everything, and the beats are amazing. Just everything about this album is just 100% amazing. There's only one album of hers that I think is better, and it's this one, Under the Pink. This was the first Tori album that I bought, and to this day, it's still my absolute favorite. It's gorgeous like nothing I have known to be gorgeous. I never get sick of listening to it. I still love the singles and the videos and the album tracks and the B-sides. It's one that I hope keeps getting more love as time goes by, because there's never been anything like it, and there will never be anything like it. Just going into a little detail of my favorite songs, in no particular order, I'd say as of today, because it changes daily. As of today, my favorite Tori songs are Sugar, Caught a Light Sneeze, Carbon, Cruel, Promise, Floating City, Playboy Mommy, Butterfly, Tear in Your Hand, and Concertina. Although, if you ask me this time next year, I might have a little bit of a different answer. Who knows? Thanks for going through this ranking with me, and I hope y'all have a great new year.